Ayo, Fallout here, and confession, I'm still addicted to making prismatic builds. I know, the medication isn't helping. Anywho, it's all to your benefit. Today, why don't we go over a PvE hunter build that is extremely entertaining. If I had to boil down the main idea of this build into just one sentence, it would be make the room go boom. Doesn't get much better than dishing out comically strong Gunpowder Gamble bombs on repeat for big and hilarious crowd control. I'm telling y'all, I genuinely get excited when I see big groups of enemies when using this build. And if you're thinking, great, I bet this build requires a certain exotic class item combo that I probably don't have. Well, good news for you. While you can use exotic class item combos to really make this build wild, which we'll go over, we actually got a few regular exotic armor options that work with this build. As you'll see in a minute, there's a fair amount of flexibility in both the armor department and the weapon department. All right, let's take it from the top. This build centers around one main aspect, Gunpowder Gamble. On regular Solar Hunter, you can only build up charges of Gunpowder Gamble by defeating enemies with solar abilities, solar debuffs, or solar weapons. Prismatic Hunter, though, can build up charges of Gunpowder Gamble by defeating targets with any abilities, and if they've taken any elemental debuff damage in addition to a solar weapon. That right there gives us much more room to work with. And don't worry, even though our weapon choices are going to be flexible, you can still go on an old school classic rampage with Sunshot if you want to. Next up, we got Stylish Executioner, which means that any debuff kill we get will give us free invis, as well as making our next melee guaranteed to weaken for yet another debuff. Before we get into fragments, why don't we really quickly talk about our exotic choice? And for that, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that we have multiple options that will work for the build, including regular exotic armor options, and you'll be fine no matter what. The bad news is that some of the more fun options definitely fall under the umbrella of exotic class armor, but again, we have a bunch of options here. In fact, I have a little tier list for you, so why don't we start with the top tier picks. First up, an exotic class item with both Caliban and Verity. Caliban makes powered melee final blows trigger an ignition, and trust me, there's going to be plenty of that. Verity makes it so that weapon final blows with a damage type matching your grenade grant a stacking damage bonus. As you can imagine, that damage bonus does apply to our Gunpowder Gamble, so hell yeah. Also, you might think you need solar kills to match your Gunpowder Gamble grenade, which is solar. But the good news here is that activating Spirit of Verity is tied to your original grenade element, meaning we can use any element grenade we want, which really swings the door open for our weapon choice later on. The other option in the top tier for this build is a class item with Caliban and Synthoceps. Syntho improves melee damage when you're surrounded. We haven't gotten to it yet, but melee damage with this build is a super easy way to build up Gunpowder Gamble charges. If you don't have an exotic class item with either of those exact combos, fear not, for we now move on into the perfectly acceptable tier, starting with literally any exotic class item with Spirit of Inmost Light, often referred to as Hoil. Inmost Light makes it so that using literally any ability will briefly empower your other two abilities, and again, this build is very ability spammy, so that would work out great. Next in the acceptable tier, any exotic class item that at least has just Verity, which we've already been over. Next we have Frosties. Yep, the regular old Frosties. Sprinting around the map will ramp up your ability charge rate. Won't power up the damage of your abilities or anything, but ain't nothing wrong with just getting your abilities back a little bit faster. Also in the acceptable tier, we have literally any exotic class item as long as one of the two perks has Caliban on it, followed by regular old Assassin's Cowl. Not necessarily for the invisibility factor, we already got that covered by Stylish Executioner to a degree, but with the Cowl, your powered melee final blows restore a portion of health and shields, which is great. Finally, we have the Bombardiers. Dodge and leave behind a bomb of your choosing. Bombardiers is fun for the additional ability spam, and remember, elemental debuff kills from your dodge bombs will help build stacks of Gunpowder Gamble. See, like I told you, plenty of options here. Check your vault for what you have, or just fiddle around and pick whichever option you like. Quick side note, by the way, whatever exotic armor you go with, do not go with regular Caliban's hand. OG Caliban is different. The base exotic only works with the proximity knife melee ability, which Prismatic Hunter does not have. Let's talk about super real quick. Thankfully, your super isn't a major part of this build, so many options will work here. You can go with either what you like or what you think your team might need. Golden Gun can smack anything extra hard and is never a bad pick. Likewise, Tether is also never a bad thing. Either weaken a group of enemies just because, or tether a big bad so he takes more damage. Hell, even Silence and Squall can provide decent AoE slow if you want additional crowd control. For your melee ability, I am hard recommending you use Threaded Spike. Not only is it quick and good damage, but it also applies a free debuff in the form of Sever, which both can activate Stylish Executioner and builds up charges for Gunpowder Gamble. Add on top of that, that Threaded Spike chains insanely well in big groups of enemies. I'm telling you, chuck your spike into just one group of enemies and you're almost guaranteed a free Gunpowder Gamble charge right away. Threaded Spike also has a neat trick in combination with an exotic class item featuring Spirit of Caliban. Since ignitions have no cooldown, that means every enemy that would die from getting pinged by your Threaded Spike will explode. Super fun to see in action, so again, hard recommending you go with Threaded Spike. Okay, fragment time. There's a couple of fragments that can really boost our potential here. We'll go through them one by one, starting with Facet of Ruin. This one's probably the most obvious to think about. Increased ignition radius and a small mobility boost, helping us keep the explosions going and giving us a better dodge cooldown. Good pick for sure. Facet of Balance will really help us ramp up the ability spam factor of our build. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage, either from any light weapon we use or from Gunpowder Gamble, will grant melee energy. And rapidly defeating targets with dark damage, either from any dark weapon we have or from our Threaded Spike melee, will grant grenade energy. This gets even further boosted when we use Transcendence, letting us spam abilities like there's no tomorrow. Facet of Mending can help keep you alive in some really clutch situations, letting you heal off any grenade kill, which of course includes Gunpowder Gamble. I'd say those are probably the core three of the build. For the final two fragments, you got a few options to pick from. Facet of Purpose is usually pretty fun, but I'm only going to recommend you run that if your super is either Golden Gun or Silence and Squall. Reason being, from those two supers, Facet of Purpose would either give you Restoration or Frost Armor, both of which are extremely awesome for helping keep you alive. Facet of Protection is a prismatic fragment that I'm almost always tempted to take for 99% of my PvE builds. Extra damage reduction for free when surrounded by enemies is incredible, really easy to get addicted to for the convenience factor. Facet of Courage can help with some extra damage from the darkness debuff our melee gives, which will boost any light ability damage. Cough, cough, Gunpowder Gamble. Facet of Hope is great on this build. While you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. Having dodge constantly charged on this build is basically free Gunpowder Gamble spam. Here's why. To repeat, throwing your Threaded Spike into just one group of enemies is almost a guarantee that you're immediately going to charge up a free Gunpowder Gamble. Therefore, you want to have your melee fully charged a lot. And if we want our melee to be charged a lot, we should be running Gambler's Dodge for free melee energy when dodging near an enemy. Coming full circle, Facet of Hope will be great at giving us a buttload of free class ability energy so we can dodge a lot. Finally, we got Facet of Bravery, and that's really only if you have either a strand or void weapon or both. Spoiler alert, by the way, one version of this build features a weapon I'm very much addicted to, Buried Bloodline. If you decide you want to use the Buried Bloodline, 100% make sure you take Facet of Bravery. Otherwise, up to you. Let me simplify it. If I'm not using Buried Bloodline, the fragments will probably look like this, and if I am using Buried Bloodline in the build, the fragments are probably gonna look like this. Again, many options will work though. These are not carved in stone. Use what you enjoy. And on that note, why don't we talk about weapons? Getting one in particular out of the way immediately. You don't have to use it at all. It is not vital to the build in any way, but boy, oh boy, do I really love Buried Bloodline. A special ammo weapon that you can use like a primary and get free Devour. What's not to love? Reminder, for any main weapon pairing I talk about with this build, if you're using exotic class armor with Spirit of Verity, you want to make sure that you're pairing your grenade element to your main workhorse weapon. So, for example, if you're using Buried Bloodline, pair that with a magnetic grenade. If you don't have the Bloodline or would like to use something explosive, Sunshot is an obvious contender for this build. Again, if you're using Spirit of Verity class armor, you'd be pairing that together with a Swarm Grenade. Anyway, because Sunshot blows up half the room on its own, you'd really have no problem at all building up Gunpowder Gamble stacks with that gun. Indebted Kindness is another great contender. And again, if you've got Spirit of Verity class armor, you'd probably want to pair that with an Arc Bolt Grenade. If you have a crafted The Call, that's another fantastic option. Can you tell I'm hard addicted to rocket sidearms, by the way? My doctor says the condition is getting worse, but God help me, am I enjoying it. For Spirit of Verity users, you would want to pair that call together with a Grapple Grenade. Fun, stupid little thing you can do there, by the way. You can throw a Gunpowder Gamble, then grapple onto it immediately with your Grapple Grenade, leading to some funky grapple melee setups. You could also use a Bold Endings hand cannon with a Duskfield Grenade if you want a stasis option. I know we've covered exotic armor options already, but I did find out I had a Verity and Renewal exotic class item combo and rocked that with both a Duskfield and Bold Endings. Ended up liking that a whole bunch. With Renewal, you can just tag a big bad yellow bar with a Duskfield and reduce their damage output. A real fuck you in particular type play. I know I just gave you a bunch of weapon options, so I'll boil it down to 3 pairings. Go ahead and take your pick, depending on what the active surges are, or whatever you enjoy using the most. For your heavy pick, to parrot what I said in my recent Grandmaster Nightfall build video, there's no heavy that's really vital to this build. You can use whatever you like, depending on the activity you're in or whatever the active surges are. Go ahead and go nuts. Stat-wise, for the build, you really want to prioritize 2 things above all else: resilience and mobility. Resil is easy, helps to keep you alive by providing additional free damage resist. You'd think that the next priority would actually be grenade or melee, but remember, if you can throw 1 spike melee into a crowd, you basically get a free Gunpowder Gamble charge. So if our priority is keeping our melee up, we could go into strength, or again, we could just go full mobility and Gambler's Dodge, since our dodge cooldown is way shorter than our melee cooldown. Dodge to get your melee charge up, melee for free Gunpowder Gamble. I know I don't often recommend high intellect in PvE content, but because this build is so ability spam heavy already, you might not even need a ton of extra discipline or strength. It's really up to you, but as long as you have high resil and mobility, you're fairly set. To cap things off, why don't we look at some armor and artifact mods. For your helmet, a siphon mod tied to whatever weapon you're going to use the most, just to make sure you're generating orbs as well as ashes to assets. With all the gunpowder bombs you'll be chucking, would be silly to not cash in on that free super energy. Momentum transfer can help give back some free melee energy if your Gambler's Dodge hasn't fully recharged yet. If you have room for it, heavy-handed would be great for additional orb generation. If you don't have room for it, focusing strike would be great for more dodge energy. For chest armor, nothing new here, all resist mods across the board depending on the activity you're in. For legs, I always like recuperation for the stay alive factor. Other than that, you could go with Orbs of Restoration and Insulation because it does keep the ability spam dream alive. And for your cloak, we've got Reaper, Powerful Attraction, and Special Finisher. Now you might be wondering, wouldn't a Kickstart mod be better? Or what if I wanted to run a Surge on my leg armor? And the truth is, you can run either of those if you like, but the bottom line is no specific armor charge mods are vital to this build, I would say. So you can use what you like. Again, Surge mods or Utility Kickstart would be just fine. You do you. Finally, the artifact. Elemental Siphon should be considered if your weapon element matches your super. The main artifact mod you want to make sure you have turned on is Solar Fulmination, which makes our ignitions somehow get even stronger and even bigger. Fulmination actually has some interesting interactions that can let our damage numbers go wild because of how this game treats ignitions. Hard to describe, think of it as giving you a second ignition every time instead of just boosting your own. If you're confused, I have a video going over the latest artifact mods more in depth if you're interested. I'll link that in the video description. Other key artifact perks are Transference for extra fun while going Transcendent, Radiant Orbs, and of course, Shield Crush. Radiant Orbs will keep us radiant a lot, and because of that, we'll have even more damage on our Gunpowder Gamble bombs. Bonus, if you have Facet of Purpose and Silence of Squall equipped, your Threaded Spike is going to hit even harder. Nice. Void Hegemony and Galvanic Armor are also on the table, but that's really going to depend on the weapons you're using. Remember, chuck that spike into a crowd, boom, free Gunpowder Gamble charge. Dodge for more Threaded Spike, rinse and repeat. Full build link down in the video description, and enjoy making the room go boom. If you have a build you want to share, let me know in our community Discord, or just go down in the comment section below. Your call. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.